From the BBC World Service, in association with ABC and All India Radio, this is Stumped.
Hello and welcome to Stumped, your intercontinental hit of news, features and debate from the quirky world of cricket. I'm Alison Mitchell in London, where I watched on the television as England went out of the T20 World Cup at the semi-final stage, beaten by New Zealand, when Jimmy Neesham and my namesake, Daryl Mitchell, stars of the show with the bat. And New Zealand, of course, now have the chance to get a first global one-day title, which they would add to their World Test Championship crown. Wouldn't that be something?
Jim Maxwell for the ABC in Sydney. Yes, it has a somewhat Australasian flavour to it, doesn't it? The approaching final. And wonderful news for Daryl Mitchell, whose father, of course, was an all-black coach. So it's strong sporting family in New Zealand. And they play above their weight all the time. And I think for most of us in the sporting world, that was a win that was due for New Zealand over England. We'll see what happens next.
Retribution over the old country, finally. But I've just suddenly realized, sorry, this is a quirky little thought, that we've got stars for every surname. We've got a Maxwell star, we've got a few Sharmas going, and of course Mitchell as well now. So that's fantastic for Stumped. I'm Charu Sharma for All India Radio in Bangalore, deep in the middle of organizing a major tennis tournament. However, this is the first one after COVID. The depression doesn't go away, not because of our loss in cricket and not because of the weather here. It's just been raining for the last 2 or 3 days, and I fear that our event may suffer greatly. But of course, Indian cricket has suffered greatly. We'll see where we go with that.
We need to move indoors for your tennis, Charu, clearly, with all that rain. Good to have you both along, as always. Now, we're going to start this week with the racism scandal that has engulfed cricket in the UK over the last few weeks. The specific story goes back more than a year, but it escalated recently, becoming front page as well as back page news and leading national news programmes, and also leading to MPs getting involved. Now, it surrounds Yorkshire County Cricket Club. They're accused of being institutionally racist by one of their former players, Azeem Rafiq, who's a former England under-19 captain. He said he was left close to suicide by some of the experiences he had at the club when he was playing. Now, Rafiq first spoke out about this in September 2020. Yorkshire then launched an independent investigation, although its independence, perceived or otherwise, was questioned by Rafiq as the law firm appointed by the club to run it used to employ the club's chairman. It was nearly a year later before Yorkshire received the report of the investigation, where Rafiq claimed it had failed to speak to key witnesses. Yorkshire first announced that Rafiq had been the victim of, quote, inappropriate behaviour. Later, following pressure from MPs, the club released a summary of the report which said he was the victim of racial harassment and bullying. But the club said there was insufficient evidence to conclude that Yorkshire was institutionally racist. They also said there was no conduct or action taken by any club employees, players or executives that warranted disciplinary action. Now, that created uproar amongst the public, particularly when a report emerged in the media claiming that a racist term about Rafiq's Pakistani heritage was regularly used towards him, but the investigation had concluded that that was friendly and good-natured banter. Now, since then, several senior figures at Yorkshire have resigned, a host of sponsors have walked out, and the ECB has suspended the club from hosting international matches. Now, a new Yorkshire chairman is in place, that's Lord Kamlesh Patel, and in a press conference last Monday, he said that Azeem Rafiq should be praised as a whistleblower, and in really what's been a complete change of tone for the club, he made a full, unreserved apology.
The revelations about complaints of racial discrimination and their handling at this cricket club over the past 18 months have rocked the sporting world. But let me be clear from the outset. Racism or any form of discrimination is not banter. It's simply not acceptable. This has been a painful and difficult period for Yorkshire County Cricket Club and all those associated with it. I thank Azeem Rafiq for his bravery in speaking out. Azeem is a whistleblower and should be praised as such. And he should never have been put through this. And I'd like to apologise to him. We're sorry for what you and your family experienced and the way in which we've handled this. What happened to you must never happen again to anyone. I want to announce that we've made the first vital step on what will be a long journey for this club. We've settled the employment tribunal case, the legal proceedings with Azeem Rafiq.
Now, here on Stumped, we want to know how this sorry mess could have been handled better. A lot of criticism has been levelled at the way Yorkshire have dealt with it all. So what can be learnt? What is best practice when it comes to dealing with complaints of racism or harassment within sports organisations? Let's speak to an expert who is directly involved in the field. That's John Mehrzad, a practising QC at Littleton Chambers who specialises in sports law and commercial. John, then what is best practice when it comes to dealing with complaints of racism or harassment in sports organisations? I mean, what for you would be, say, a non-negotiable in terms of how things should be gone about?
And I believe that there are 2 points that are absolutely non-negotiable. One you've touched on already, which is whoever carries out the independent review, be it an individual or panel, there must be no conflicts at all. And that's very important because we're talking about public integrity, public trust and confidence, and therefore people who feel as though they are able to contribute to these types of reviews, investigations, do not think they're whitewashed. That's point one. And then secondly, if I can go right to the other end of the process, something I'm very firm about is that if I spend many months and speak to dozens, if not more people, and my job is to uncover and give a view independently, it is imperative that my report or my panel's report is published in full. There is no point in going through this process if it is not published in full, because it obviously, as has happened in this case, leads to rumour, conjecture, and an utter lack of confidence in the process. And I should say, just as a matter of practicality, in such scenarios where the press interest is intense, it is inevitable that the report will be leaked anyway, and there will be a concurrent legal process, which means that the report would have to be disclosed as part of that legal process. Those are the 2 non-negotiables, but what flows from that is, of course, trust and confidence in the process.
John, it's Jim Maxwell, and I was going to ask you about the particular case here, trust and confidence. You talked about, on the one hand, Yorkshire County Cricket Club, and on the other, the governing body, the ECB. So how closely should these two be working together, and what power do both of these organisations have?
What I often hear in situations like this, because I'm often commissioned not simply by a particular club or a particular individual sport, but often by a regulator or funder as well. And of course, what the regulator and funder would say, in this case, the ECB, we are not the employer. It is Yorkshire Cricket Club who is the employer. So the duties are not on us to investigate. But with the greatest of respect, whilst that might be correct in pure employment law terms, the impact that these allegations have on cricket are far wider than simply Yorkshire Cricket Club. And secondly, the ECB is the custodian of the game domestically, and it not only focuses on sport here, but it has an impact globally on the reputation of cricket. The ECB, as a regulator, is also entitled to discipline and investigate these very allegations. You probably remember Ollie Robertson's charge in terms of historical tweets. That led to an ECB disciplinary commission. So best practice would be joined up thinking that a commissioning board in an ideal scenario shouldn't just simply be the county cricket club, but should also involve input from the ECB.
As we look at this, are we talking about education, training, whatever? Are other people involved in this up to the task of managing a problem that we've seen unfold here with the Yorkshire Club?
I also sit as an independent discipline chair for the Football Association here, and I look into allegations of discrimination within football domestically. And one point I know that if an allegation of discrimination is found to have been proven, it is mandatory that there is not simply a suspension and a fine, but that particular individual is obliged to carry out an education course within a set period of time. And if they don't carry out that education course within a set period of time, their suspension is indefinite. Now, I've looked at recent ECB decisions, and there are recommendations for education. It is not mandatory. One sport is doing things in a way which is you must now educate, and another one is recommending, which isn't the same. And then if I just go back to what I said a moment ago, Jim, can you remember I said that Yorkshire is the employer? Well, every employer in this country, this jurisdiction, England and Wales, has to have an equality, diversity and inclusion policy. What I have seen in sports, I'm not going to name names, but sometimes it can be a box ticking exercise, that a policy exists, but it's not implemented in practice, and there's very limited training.
What are the lines that people have to face, the fine lines between banter and the obvious informality that exists within team members or I suppose any activity, certainly sport, and the transgression of that, because often that can be a very fine line or difficult to read.
I suspect many of us who've played sport in the past have heard historically comments, but I'm afraid certainly within this jurisdiction, society evolves, culture evolves, and standards that may once upon a time have been overlooked, I'm afraid are no longer acceptable standards. So context is key, and it's something that's drummed into all disciplinary panelists and investigators, that you don't just take words and look at them in a dictionary sense, you look at the context in which they are used.
John, and when it comes to that, and there's that one sense of saying, was what was said harassment? But what if there's a dispute as to whether that thing was said at all? When there's no actual evidence, in the Ollie Robinson case, there were actual tweets that people could view, how should a panel make a judgment? What are they taking into account in order to determine whether a complaint is upheld or not when there is no physical actual evidence?
It can often be one person's word against another. And then what you do is you test that evidence. You ask questions sensitively, given the seriousness of the matter, but you try and delve deeper. You try and find out about the timing, distance away of individuals, what was the circumstances, was it good-natured up until that point? All these questions that allow you to build up a picture. Because ultimately, what we are looking at is a civil standard. This is not a criminal matter. So on the balance of probabilities, is it more likely than not that this has happened? So Alison, I'm afraid you have to test the evidence. You have to investigate thoroughly. And sometimes you, I'm afraid, have to decide who you believe more.
From the BBC World Service, this is Stumped on All India Radio.
Well, listening to all of that, along with us, is Anuj Dal, all-rounder with Derbyshire County Cricket Club and Vice-Chair of the Professional Cricketers Association. Anuj is also part of the PCA's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Group. Hi, Anuj. I just wonder what your thoughts are on what you've been hearing there from John.
Hi, Alison. Obviously, it's a massive topic at the moment, and it's heartbreaking, actually, to hear what Azim had to go through. But on the other hand, it's a topic that, fortunately, the PCA and our governing body have been so proactive in trying to deal with, in terms of the education side of it, just making players aware of actually, that this topic is so ever so present in our game at the moment, and it's very important that it's being addressed properly.
And it was Jim Maxwell in Sydney, listening to your fine words there. But a couple of months ago, you mentioned in an interview with your club's website that it's now is the time, great time, to challenge and have further education. Have you been or seen any of these new educational programs, and what do they involve?
Yes, the education side of it is really powerful. It's run by the EW group, and it's been delivered to 90 different groups across the playing membership. Not only players, staff members, it's run to academy members in the youth pathways as well. They're very informative. They create, hopefully, an environment where players within our changing room are comfortable just asking questions, understanding what is construed as banter, what is construed as actual racism. It's an open environment where guys feel comfortable understanding and looking at videos and actually saying, well, actually, is this acceptable? Is this not acceptable? Because it's a very fine line, as what I've experienced, between actually banter and actually out and out racism. The uptake has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, not only, we had those education sessions with the EW group, but also we've had follow-up sessions. We've had videos from players across all the counties, also the England Cricket Board, that their men's teams and female teams, talking about how they've engaged with the education sessions. Also hearing about what other players had to kind of deal with. Before the education sessions were actually tied in, we had a kind of a pilot session that incorporated a lot of players from different counties. We had some England players on there. I know on the pilot group that I had Chris Jordan in there. They were talking about certain issues that they had to deal with, and it was extremely powerful hearing your own teammates and also other fellow professionals talk about what they'd had to deal with. What it has done is it has just made this stigma of racism, it's kind of eradicated that a little bit, and it's just made people more aware and comfortable to actually talk about it. we have different players coming from different countries, and for them in one country, the social acceptance might be very different to actually what it's like in the UK.
Anuj, this is Charu Sharma from Bangalore, India. If you put on your PCA hat, Anuj, and what support have you been able to offer Azim through the association? And what more can the organization do to help more who might be willing to come forth to be a whistleblower, or as Michael Holding may have said, to share their story of the racism they felt in the game?
Right from the start, when Azim first came out with the story, I think the PCA were very proactive in making sure that they were involved in the case. I mean, the whole point of the Professional Cricket Association is to support players no matter what through any form of issue. And players like Azim knew exactly what the PCA stance was, and they knew that they were going to get full support moving forward. So, I'm very fortunate. I sit on the PCA board, and I understand the matters of how Azim was getting support and still is getting support. But not only that, but we also had to look at the players, that Azim had obviously mentioned, and also making sure that they were getting support. Because sometimes, you can look at it in one way and think, yes, we've got to make sure Azim is getting the support he requires. But also it's about educating the players that, he'd mentioned. The whole big point of it is actually making sure the education side of it targets both ends of the spectrum.
I imagine personal and mental health support for those players as well, whom the allegations are against.
Absolutely right. And it was very important that both sides of that story got the support that they needed.
Thank you for coming on Stumped this morning, and let's hope that the game and society with it can move in the right direction. Anuj Dal, thank you for being with us on Stumped.
Thanks, guys.
Well, that's it for Stumped this week here on All India Radio. Next week, we will look back on the final of the Men's T20 World Cup. We'll know who the champions are. But for now, my thanks to Jim Maxwell and Charu Sharma, and of course to you for listening. You can follow us during the week on Twitter. We're at BBCWS Sport. Use the hashtag BBC Stumped. See you again next week. Bye-bye.
Stumped is a BBC sport production for the BBC World Service in association with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and All India Radio.